In today's episode,
Let's segue to that fake it till you make it thing, because I have the same response when I see that, because I'm like, time out. A, if there's room to fail for your team or whatever, then nobody's going to fake anything. You're going to give them room for authenticity. If you don't give people room for authenticity or room to fail, you will get fakers who will fake it, and they may not make it. More than likely, if someone's faking it, they're going to be exposed. Versus someone that's experienced imposter syndrome, and they're going to drive. You're going to see incredible results, more than likely. But yeah, fake it till you make it always bugged me, because I always felt like, who's legitimately faking right now? Like making up that they can do their job or whatever. But I also think you will get people faking if they don't have room to fail.
Let's start off like we always do with this week's definition. What do you think? Psychologist Pauline Rose Clance was intricate to the field, one of the foundational researchers here in the field of imposter syndrome. She defined imposter syndrome as the feeling of internal inadequacy that high-achieving people experience. She and her colleague Suzanne Imes first described it in 1978 as the imposter phenomenon.
Wow, the lady that coined the term, if I'm not mistaken.
Legend.
Nailed it.
Think we got to get her on the podcast. Let's get to work there and let's dive in. Here we are at episode 3. It feels like we're doing something, guys. I don't know your thoughts on this one, but it feels like we're doing something.
Yeah. No, definitely. We're talking about things. We're making it happen.
We are talking. I think when I look up definition of a podcast, like what is it you do? I guess we talk about things. So here we are talking about things, and today what we're going to be talking about is Jeff. We're following the interview process, and we're going to be asking as many questions as we could fit in about a 45 to however many minutes session. And Jeff, you're going to be in the hot seat today, buddy. So I hope you brought your A game.
Bring it. ChatGPT and Copilot are really going to help out. So,
I will say the initial questions were the product of ChatGPT for all of your lazy needs when it comes to questions and answers.
To that at the Rage Against the Machines.
You're a purist, are you, Kyle?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. There's something there.
Yeah.
Well, Jeff, I think I'm going to start with a question, and just for those listening, we've got 20 questions we're going to be using across our interviews. We'll probably, when we start bringing guests on, we'll probably be using some of these same questions, and they're broken down in categories. And the first one we're going to start with is one that's really focused around insights and perspectives. And the question, and Jeff, this is the first question, and then Kyle will grab one. But the question is, why do you think imposter syndrome is so prevalent, A, and then B, among high achievers and creators? And we may have to break those, much like in episode 2, where we had to break down some things with Kyle. We may want to look at achiever, business world, creative. We may want to look at that almost like it's 2 questions, but I want your take on why do you think imposter syndrome is so prevalent among high achievers and creators?
Yeah, great question. I think it's twofold. I think one is it's an excellent motivator, and if it's there is sort of a continual pursuit of achievement, validation, feedback, goal setting, goal hitting, and you just keep feeding the beast. And then as your knowledge grows or your capabilities grow in that area, it might sound a little cliche, but it might never be enough. As I look through, what does that mean? And you guys may have other questions related to it, but it, So I think that's first and foremost, you're going to find it among high achievers, and that's because it's one of their main motivators. Um, and then I think in the creative sense, similarly, I think what it gives us the ability to do is try to find peace in predictability or connecting dots. And most creatives, whether it's, musicians, they can connect dots, or great comedians, it gives them a different perspective, and they can connect dots and bring perspective that others find funny, but then match that creative mindset with the it's not enough yet mindset. And now they're really motivated and they're really creative. Do you find that sort of like combination that's like a super combo there where it's fueling their creative energy because they have those perspectives. Um, and then, you know, um, what other thing here? And you sort of can step into the breach. And what I mean by that is where you do have that ability then was it's, to get on stage and start telling people your perspectives that you hope they find funny, and you're going to get feedback about that. Or you can step into a breach with a big project or opportunity, or, hey, we're looking for volunteers to take on this next thing, within a work setting. And it allows you to step into that. And Kyle, I loved your answer from last week's, which was like, why did I not think about this before I said yes, that this was going to be back upon me? And so then I think what we start developing is in those moments, or then the coping mechanisms around after we've stepped into that breach, decided to achieve or decided to share our perspectives or our art with someone. But I think for those of us that kind of maybe were raised with some uncertainty, connecting the dots is an absolute must to make sense of our world. And I think that can fuel, especially complex things like, me, I work in technology, I put puzzles together a lot is what I like to say. And then that can bring other opportunities. But I also think in the creative world, it is going to be about, if we think of a great actor, a great comedian, we're so interested in their perspective. We're so interested in their lens, and they have the ability to share it.
There's some things in Kyle. I'm probably I'm gonna ask for your input on some of his response to that question before we move to your question. But I got some follow-up questions on that one because I was scribbling furiously on a pad as you were talking. And one of the things that I really noticed there was, you mentioned something along the lines of, will it ever be enough? And, a question came to mind for me, which is, what does enough look like? What is enough? And, I don't know that I have an answer for that. Um, and as you continue to talk, one of the things that I was thinking was, is it about enough? Is it even about the accomplishment? How how much of it is taking that, kinetic energy that if you don't get it out in an outlet somehow, that it'll burn you up inside. So, how much of it is really like it's okay if you don't ever feel like you've accomplished the thing, but you got to do something with that energy. You've got to get it out of you or it will burn you hollow.
Oh,
Um, so
absolutely. Well, for me personally, I was lucky enough to have um, athletics in my life that were a high degree of catharsis. I had I grew up playing hockey, and then I played rugby. And you get a chance to hit people a few times a week, which is awesome. Um, but yeah, it can be, it's an inner incinerator. And, I mentioned in one of the, I think in episode 1, okay, there's about to be scorched earth. If I don't deal with it internally, I may scorch others around me, whatever it is. And for me, the finding enough didn't really line up until I think there's two things you have to have: identity and purpose. If you're lacking identity and you're lacking purpose, you're going to continue seeking and seeking and seeking enough. But I think there's two things. One is the awareness of imposter syndrome, and then secondarily aligning the drive with the purpose and the identity. And then when those two marry up, or those three things marry up, then I think you've got a shot at that. And then, yeah, I definitely encourage anybody with a high amount of a high degree of energy. Yeah, go find some catharsis.
Well, Kyle, I'm gonna turn it over to you with, follow-up questions if you have any feedback for some of those comments, or if you just wanna launch into your own question. You have the mic, man.
Yeah, I think that was an amazing response, and, one thing that makes me think of is that it feels like when you talk about creatives and high achievers, sometimes the trip brings a lot of unexpected, and, I think of a lot of my creative heroes, like D'Angelo, for example, is one of my musical heroes. Michael Eugene Archer, shout out, to Michael Eugene Archer, that's his real name, D'Angelo. And, but D'Angelo is a guy who, if you recall, in I think it was 2000, he had a platinum record called Voodoo. And his first record came out, I think he was 18. And then he took like 8 years to make Voodoo. And then he took 20 years to make Black Messiah and had a lot of personal crises in between. But the thing about him was like his big breakthrough music video off of Voodoo was How Does It Feel? Or Untitled, How Does It Feel? And if you recall, I won't get too graphic here, but it's him in a shower without a shirt and he's jacked and and he just becomes this sex icon. But the thing is that that Michael Eugene Archer is not that guy. That's who the record label saw him as. And one of the reasons that he got into drug abuse, bad relationships, he got into a car accident that broke his neck. And this is he was a prodigy. He's one of our greatest living artists. And, he's akin to Prince. Prince was his hero. And I would put him in that realm, not as high of an output, but that was his hero. And you could definitely see that in him. And
Wow.
they interviewed him much later in life, after all that, and he talks about how when that music video came out, he's a guy that would rather get stoned and play video games on a beanbag and make music by himself, and that is who he is. He's a nerd. He called himself he's like, "I'm a nerd. I wanna play video games and sit on a beanbag, eat Cheetos. I'm not a workoutaholic, even though I'm completely jacked in that video," because he eventually got pretty big and like physically, he kind of got overweight. And all that to say is that the obvious thing about D'Angelo is that he's a musical genius. But what he's not, and what a lot of creatives and driven people are, kind of going back to Jeff's point, especially with his sports, talking about his sports career, is that the trip brings a lot of things that you don't expect. And I think if the imposter syndrome is there, that stuff is really going to drive that out. I think like career wise, like I look at my career a little differently now that I have 4 mouths to feed and my mortgage is attached to it. When you start to strain that relationship with things and other things outside of just that synergy that comes between you and achieving when you're a high achiever, then there's a lot of strain. For D'Angelo, it was the music videos and being a sex icon and the expectations of pop culture, when really he just wanted to make music and be a nerd, and so I think, I'm not saying that I'm up to that level or we are up to that level, but I think once you start straining that with more things, then that imposter syndrome pops up. It's like, it's like, when you put a price tag on it, when you put a price tag on your time, then you feel like expectations are there. And then how you handle those expectations really, I find that it brings out the imposter syndrome. So that's kind of what
Wow.
you jostled loose in my brain, with your response there, Jeff.
Cool. Glad I could get something out of you.
Yeah. This is a really interesting question on Johnny's list, Jeff. Do you think workplaces are doing enough to address imposter syndrome, and what changes would you recommend? This question was screaming at me on the list.
Yeah. So it's definitely, it's a little bit more of a buzzword than it is um, what would I call it? Like one of these things to tackle, right? Because a workplace is going to talk about motivation. They're going to talk about, there's going to be seminars on how things go or how they want things to be, whichever else, and anything else really in kind of the category of what I'd say is industrial organizational psychology in the typical workplace. This one doesn't come up a lot except unless it's in conversation and someone happens to have come across the term, or they themselves experienced and they know how to articulate it in a way. Or it's a little bit on the kind of something to kind of razz about a little bit versus take seriously. And I think from a standpoint of this is a legitimate thing upon the employee base or the work base or the leadership or anybody. And it's something that probably just needs as much attention as, when they do talk about, finding motivation and having work-life balance and all those kinds of like industry terms. This is one to put out there and say, hey, this is what this looks like, sounds like, feels like. Here's a definition. If you're struggling with it, here's the people to talk to that also, and get it a little more normalized. Because I think what it can do is, like we talked, a little bit about, there's that internal inferno that could happen, and I think it just burnout. It's a hockey stick if it's not addressed.
How can we monetize your imposter syndrome? Is that what you're asking? I'm just kidding.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So Kyle, I love that you grabbed that question. That the statistic that I've seen is less than 5% of corporate America actually addresses it. And one of the questions is, do we want them to? They're the razzing that Jeff mentioned and the misinterpretation that's going to be out there when you put this into the workplace. It's going to be a tough haul because people are really going to have to commit to those two words, imposter syndrome. They're going to have a better understanding of them, not a layperson's understanding, and not all the different misinterpretations that happen. And we start the episode off with the definition of the day, and there's a reason why we do that, because it's so ill-defined. It can be such a nebulous topic, and hopefully part of what we do is going to be defining that better. And Kyle, I love the one that you chose and picked on early on when you read it in the very beginning, which we'll get back to that.
Yeah, and the number you bring up makes sense given probably what most of us experience, and unless you're lucky enough to have a leader that recognizes it and then says, "Hey, come here, let's chat."
Yeah, and tries to understand it. That what it is. It's not. It's not just the fake it till you make it. Yeah, I always have a love-hate relationship with that statement because
Same.
I think a lot of times that gets leveraged. I don't think it always applies, and I think what ends up happening is people just take generalized self-doubt and they go, "Oh, well, that's imposter syndrome." No, it's not. It's different. It's something much more foundational.
Well,
And
let's segue to that fake it till you make it thing, because I have the same response when I see that, because I'm like, time out. A, if there's room to fail for your team or whatever, then nobody's going to fake anything. You're going to give them room for authenticity. If you don't give people room for authenticity or room to fail, you will get fakers who will fake it, and they may not make it. More than likely, if someone's faking it, they're going to be exposed. Versus someone that's experienced imposter syndrome, and they're going to drive, you're going to see incredible results more than likely. But yeah, fake it till you make it always bugged me, because I always felt like, who's legitimately faking right now? Like making up that they can do their job or whatever. But I also think you will get people faking if they don't have room to fail. And, you can say, hey, look, I need your full self here. And yeah, you've got room to fail. So I don't need you faking anything. If you're uncertain about something, learn how to articulate that and let's talk about it. But yeah, I would say that faking it is only going to show up in environments where people are terrified of failure.
mm. We talked early on a lot about the people that inspired us and some of the mentors that we've had over the years. Jeff, I think Charlie was yours. Perry, I think, was the one that you mentioned, Kyle. And, Chris Kelso was one that the person that introduced me, but I've had a lot of had a lot of people that I would consider mentors. And one of the things that I've noticed about the fake it till you make it is inside of that statement, inherently, there's almost a you're on your own. And so now you have to go fake it until you make it. And, if someone's there providing good mentoring, there's a lot more touch points along that way. So, maybe there is some fake it till you make it, but it's shorter cycles. And I think just that statement creates such too much an over self-reliance when sometimes, we do need that village and we need those mentors. And that's another one of the facets of my love-hate relationship with the fake it till you make it statement. So
anytime I read it or hear it, I have a similar response, an inward response. I'm like, I don't like it.
Yeah, the idea of being caught faking it petrifies me. So it has a reverse effect on me. It's like, how many more things can I do to understand? That's not me tooting my own horn. I'm just saying the way it affects me is like, I do not want to be caught faking it. It's like, I want to know my stuff, and it's like, but that's part of that achiever thing. It's like, that's kind of the effect.
well, our listeners aren't privy to the conversations we have in the background and some of the things that I've gotten to learn through listening to your other podcast. You are meticulous, and I am certain that probably comes with the price. I'm certain that comes with, it can be a little bit of a toil. And, I love the fact that you show up with, your collective shit together, and that is commendable. But I also can see as a friend that there's probably a part of your life that's probably negatively impacted because you want to maybe you over prepare.
Yeah. No, it's super insightful, man. You've known me a long time. So you definitely would have a window seat for that. And yeah, I think a big part of that, I bludgeon myself to death for mistakes too, and after I get done recording or after a set, like my first thought is, wow, you really, like, even when I've killed on stage or, recorded a great show or whatever, I'm like, okay, you did these 12 things wrong and you are an idiot.
Yeah.
Go back to the basement.
Yeah.
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 Well,
What do you think you're doing?
Yeah, the brag book that we need to build for ourselves. I've had leaders over the years that even for just, people that are coworkers that I would say probably have no issue with self-confidence. We've had brag books that we put together, and it's so difficult because you start listing them out, and it's almost like internally the value that I assign to the good things I do is always outweighed by the just huge value, the huge quotient that I assign to whatever screw ups there are. And it might be an hour's worth of a meeting or a conversation or this podcast or something I've written. And, one thing sticks out, man, that's all I can see. And that's the nature of imposter syndrome.
Mhm.
So I'm not even sure which question we're on and if it's mine or not, but I'm just going to grab it because this one ties into to in some degree the conversation we're having about leaders helping us as we're working through this piece of it. And this is under the workplace dynamics segment of the question. And the question is, how can managers, team leaders, and let's insert mentors, support employees who are struggling with imposter syndrome? We've called out a problem. We've said less than 5% of corporate America, but I've always been taught that if you're going to call something out, you maybe come with some suggestions. What are some suggestions that you have around how to manage or support employees struggling with imposter syndrome, Jeff?
Yeah, definitely. So I was lucky enough to have, one of those, and there was no like program. There's no like, hey, we need to, it was just somebody that had come from a similar school or a similar background, I guess. And I think, so I'd say first and foremost, just have a heightened level of awareness of when we talk about the definitions or when we talk about the symptoms here, to be on the lookout, just like you would on caring about the growth of your employees. This is absolutely something, if it's going unchecked, is something they're going to need to grow and learn from. So that's number one. Number two, I would say familiarize yourself with, I struggle with, it's not really treatment, but it is, if we all know how to respond to someone that may be having burnout, demotivation, whichever. But do you have something in your playbook for someone that is struggling with imposter syndrome? And just like you would be intentional with any other teammate that's shared something with you, or how they're looking to grow, or whatever some of these shortcomings are, and you want to coach them up or coach them through this, or just be alongside them or share, be intentional. And then I think, just like you would with anything else, like, hey, if you're struggling with X, Y, or Z, this is one of those things that, you can come in about, you can talk about. And we do want to talk about it, because we know that the downside of it going unchecked is not a good thing. Can lead to turnover, retention, burnout, demotivation, can eventually just eat you up. So it's, I would say, awareness and intentionality in 2 words.
One of my favorite words. It sometimes gets a little overused, but probably because it's so functional. It's such a perfect word. Are you there? Are you bought in? Nothing annoys me more than when I'm in, maybe it's a networking situation, or I I'm at a social event, or uh, someone's trying to help me, somebody that provides service or something in those areas, and they're just not there. That is it's almost an insult to the individual, if there's not that intentionality brought to the table. So, in a manager, man, all the more so. So I think that's a
Absolutely.
great word, and one that we need to take more seriously as a culture.
Completely agree.
Yeah, I think your culture has.
I'll
Oh, good.
sorry, we'll edit that piece out. I was just gonna kick it over to you.
Oh, cool. I think it's interesting. I like what you're saying. There is almost a utopian element to it, though, because I feel like these are the questions that need to be asked, right? But we've all been a part of enough work cultures to know that it's like it's got to be really locked in and tuned to this thing. Like, this has to be a foundational element of a culture in a workplace, because the problem is that I'll just say the median kind of where culture sits in any industry, like the negative outputs of imposter syndrome can, if you tend to veer towards overwork and overperformance as a way to make up for your insecurity, then that sometimes aligns with an unhealthy, oh, first in, last out, Kyle's the first in, last out of the office, it can align. But if your reaction to that is to shy away, to become quieter in meetings, to contribute less, that can be perceived as lack of interest or lack of performance. So
Yep.
if you're not finely tuned, and John, you said this perfectly, like, they have to know what this is, and they have to know the definition, and they have to be well versed, because if they're not, then it's either you're an overperformer because of your imposter syndrome, and that works because you're putting in extra time and you're hitting your number, or getting past your number, or you're getting projects done early in a big way, or you're shying away and not participating, and you're looked down on, and potentially on your last rung to your pink slip, because that's how you react to imposter syndrome. So that's what's difficult. It's like, you got to be really in tune, because how do you recognize the difference? Who has that keen eye to recognize the difference between disinterest and maybe shyness that's induced by this condition?
Right. Yeah. And and then some tools to check in, as much as we would if we saw someone demotivated. And, we've all gotten those management trainings on how to deal with burnout, or how to, regulate your culture and everything else. But Kyle, you mentioned an interesting point where they will start self-regulating the driver, which is that eventually, and it could you could see just fluctuations, big swings of effort, and then down. So those peaks and valleys, yeah, it just needs to be on the radar, and then you need to have a tool set to and treat it every importantly as you would with every other management tool you've been given up until this point. It needs to be a real thing.
I think that's so well said, and I hate to say it, and I wouldn't say all of them, but I would say the majority of the places I've worked, you know, disinterest is just evaluated one way, and it's lack of performance. You know, no one's like, I wonder if Kyle's going through something, or I wonder, and there are maybe individuals in my life that I've grown close to in the workplace that may think that way, but by and large, there's not a lot of patience for that type of thing. I would just, not to paint it harshly, but that's just my experience. It's like very few people are so in tune that they think, oh, Kyle might be going through something. It's just, oh, he's underperforming.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
My wife has told me, she listened to the first episode and she said I used the word unpack too much. So honey, sorry. I'm about to use the word unpacked again if you're listening. I want to unpack that word utopia. That is such a charged statement that you made. And the second you said it out loud, there's this argument going on in my head because no one would get anything done if it was all touchy-feely, warm and huggy. Let's talk through our feelings before we execute anything. You spend 6 days talking about, everyone's feelings and emotions about it. But at the same time, you got to. It can't be utopian. It has to be somehow integrated, and it's got to have balance. But maybe if there's one thing I can say, that if somebody's listening and they're a leader or they're a manager, they're a mentor, and they have that, suck it up buttercup mentality, what I've always found is, what happens when it's you? What about when it's your feelings? Do you have that same outlook? Are you that cold and straightforward and black and white? When it's your feelings, suddenly they become very important. So how do we balance it? How do we integrate that? And the business place is oftentimes the worst place to try those types of social exercises. Hence the less than 5%. But Kyle, that word utopia, it's a little bit almost set up by culture to say, well, we can never get there, but I don't know, maybe we can. And maybe it's empathy. It's put yourself in the other person's shoes. It's when you've got feelings, man, that's sure important. And when it's somebody else's feelings, you don't get to be so dismissive, or you don't get to be, not just as a manager, but as a coworker, as a friend, as a whatever. So,
I think
utopia.
Right. I think any utopia could theoretically exist, depending on the management's team's ability to tune themselves into all the human things that are going on with the people, period. You are going to get such a collective of human experience that I honestly think it's more up to a leader. John, to your point, you were talking about, or Kyle, you mentioned it looks like underperformance, but if you're studying the psychology of leadership, you're probably going to be like, wait, I need to double click on this dip in performance as a psychological thing, not a true motivating, or not a true issue with performance. And if that's sort of your first take is, interesting. I'm seeing fluctuations in behavior because I'm tuned in enough to my team to know, okay, could be this, could be that. Now, as a good leader, how do I start, pulling back a little of the surface here? And I think that's what's going to also keep people sticky with your organization, that they do know that you're in tune with them, not from a micromanagement standpoint, but just from a, hey, I've baselined your behavior. I think I understand you and what makes you tick, and now I'm seeing some differences. Just want to check in, and that alone I think is going to be huge. And then if it starts to look and sound like imposter syndrome, learn then what's upon you and your team and your teammate. What does that mean for them? What does that mean for you as a leader? Just like you would with any other potential issue that comes your way.
The either of you heard of Slavoj Žižek?
I have not.
I'm gonna take us down a weird path here, but he is my favorite Slovenian Marxist philosopher. Batshit crazy. I don't agree with anything the guy has to say, except one thing that kind of makes sense. I find him entertaining. He's fascinating just to watch talk. I think it's Slovojzizek. And man, get prepared for some oddities. But one of the things that he says, and I kind of agree with this, is he says communism is the best system. It just won't work. And he kind of goes into the nature of, there's so much of it that's set on these highly altruistic concepts of getting together and being together. And it's like, but it won't work because we can't. We're not ready for that yet. And so that word utopia sometimes, maybe that ties into it, is at some point, the utopia becomes a little bit more reality. Maybe it's done in little increments. But the idea of having that, unachievable, unattainable goal, but it's the right thing to do. That it's good. We want to talk about feelings. We want to talk about, but but it's not going to work. It's you try to implement it in the workplace, and it'll just fall on its face. I think there's some there in that conversation. There's some ties that connect in, and go check out Slavoj Žižek. I'll send you some links, and we'll put some in the comments. But Kyle, if you want to please pull me out of this segue that I've taken us down with a question, I will stop talking now.
I know I almost pulled out all my communist material. Yeah, Karl Marx, great beard. All right. I'm seriously, I gotta eject these thoughts now. I'm brewing on my, okay.
Careful, I'll pull you down some weird holes, man.
Yeah, man. I'm like, too much Tolstoy. This is this is a really good one. How do you prevent imposter syndrome from derailing your projects or ambitions? We kind of hit on this one last week, but this is like the next evolution of that discussion.
How do you prevent it from impacting?
That's correct. Yeah. How do you keep it from derailing or impacting projects negatively?
Okay, so for me, in my own personal experience, let me talk about where it would manifest negatively. Overworking, over-seeking validations from leadership or peers or whatever else, but isn't this going well? Isn't it, and I think, and then, it can lead to a little bit of burnout, or it can lead to disappointment, because there's not a lot of people that are wired to probably fuel what you're needing in those moments or whatever. For me, it was really, okay, I've got this thing that's going to creep in, and all right, so how do I deal with it as it's coming in? First, for me, it's focused on outcomes, regardless of whatever other kind of human components might be around me. I can focus on those outcomes, and then being really kind of data driven. And this may sound cold, but you can start removing some of the emotions of the work to be able to function. So if you're someone that struggles with you have a lot of emotional components wrapped into how you're organizing yourself, your work, or your team, you've got to start learning to kind of decouple that. And it's not total cognitive dissonance. What it means is you're aware that you have potentially an emotional component that can derail the outcome. And so between the awareness, the focusing on the outcome, and then so from a data-driven perspective, what I'd say is, are you tracking against the outcome? And if you're not measuring that, you're going to have a very hard time internalizing how far we've come so far. So stop, measure, and you can sort of provide for yourself that visual reassurance. Oh, wow, we're moving the needle. Literally, this is what I'm here to do. And then, I've aligned myself with my, that goal and that outcome, and my own personal feelings of unworthiness, or I shouldn't be here within this opportunity, or whatever it is. You can overcome that with the information. And that's, for me, I've got to see it. I've got to quantify it. Or like, to your point, I think meticulousness came up earlier. Absolutely. And that's really the preventative measures for me. And it helps me segregate the emotional components from the execution, where early in my career, before I understood what this was or what was going on, those emotional components would be much more mixed in and manifest themselves, whether it was burning myself out, maybe burning up something else, pushing the team too hard, whatever that, or that crushing, crippling amount of self-doubt where, you just, it's tough getting out of bed.
Jeff, you said some things in there that I connected to the old parable of feeding the wolves. I think it's a Native American, Indigenous American parable, and it's essentially, you've got two wolves inside of you, and it really depends on which one you feed. I think you guys have both probably heard it, and I think the first two things you said, you were, stop seeking validation and don't overwork yourself, and it's like that's the bad food. That's feeding the wrong wolf. That's not healthy interaction there. And so pulling them over into the healthier feeding of the wolves, it sounds like it was sort of what you were encapsulating there,
Definitely.
in that answer, in that response.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great way of putting it. And then I have another story that goes with that. And it's the parable of the two lumberjacks. You guys heard this one? There's two lumberjacks, and they each show up to the woods at the exact same time every single day and begin to cut down trees. And they get moving and they get going. But every day, one of the lumberjacks leaves for an hour, and the other one just keeps working. I got to keep going. This is my job. I got to keep hacking down these trees. And then the other one comes back after that hour or 2 hours, whatever it is, and comes back. And at the end of every day, the lumberjack that left cut down more trees than the lumberjack that stayed. And finally, after a little time goes by, the second lumberjack is so fed up with the first one, that leaves. And he says, we show up at the exact same time every day. We have the exact same equipment, and I work just as hard as you do, or twice as hard. I don't leave. You leave. Where are you going? What are you doing? And then how come you're cutting down more trees than me? And the first lumberjack just says, oh, I go home and I sharpen my axe. Sharpen your axe. Know when it's time to sharpen your axe. It will get dull. You're great at what you do, but it will get dull. Go home, sharpen your axe. Come back, and you'll get more done.
That's strong.
Lumberjack story.
That's a strong story.
I love that. I love it. I think I don't know if this is apocryphal or not, but I think it's Abraham Lincoln. The quote is, "If I had 8 hours to chop down a tree, I'd spend 6 sharpening the axe." I think there's a warning in there, though. You could grind it all the way to nothingness if you don't watch it out, like Kyle sometimes does, as we covered earlier. But yeah, you're right. That preparation does create confidence and does create, it's the good food
Yes.
in a lot of ways if done properly.
Yeah.
Luckily, I don't go outside, so the axe is not a problem for me because it's just, I don't. That sounds dangerous. I'm the great outdoorsman. That doesn't, not a problem.
I will use that analogy with teammates or people that end up on my team or in my sort of influence or purview or whatever. If I can see their, and if once they connect with the story, then my next thing is all you got to tell me sometimes is sharpening my axe. I gotta go sharpen my axe. I know exactly what that means. Refueling, regenerating, focusing on how to get back through these next events. And that's the room. That's the space, right? That's the intentionality. And so it may be something that's simple, or, giving people above me that story, if they can connect with it. I'm just like, hey, look, these guys need to go sharpen their axes. And it sticks. It's an easy, it's a fun one.
Yeah, that's powerful. I mean, that's lessons that, and I think that's the nature of analogies. I use a lot of analogies, and I'll use sports analogies. And if anyone has ever seen me throw a ball or swing a baseball bat, they know I'm not real big on sports. And but there's such a rich vocabulary, and there's so many available analogies when it comes to sports that I'll use them. But back in the sales days, that we'd be running a sales call, and I'd be using a sports analogy, and somebody would look over and just like biting their tongue. Man, what the hell do you know about sports? I don't know. I know a lot about analogies, though. I definitely know that, and there's power in them. And I think, Jeff, that really was a powerful way to look at something that can be useful. It's something that, you can walk away with that and remember the story of the lumberjacks, which, Kyle, I don't know about you. The comic side of me was like, oh God, where's this going? This is going to get dirty. And it didn't. So that was nice. But I do think
You mean with the lumberjack thing?
with the lumberjack thing, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was just, every time I hear lumberjack, I think syrup, just automatically. I just think about syrup. I don't even eat syrup, I mean, it's funny, I know people are out there chopping down trees. I've never met a lumberjack, or at least anyone that calls themselves a lumberjack or a lumberjill, there's no, don't forget about the lumberjills out there.
That's an interesting thing. Have I ever met someone that's, "Hey, what do you do?" "I'm a lumberjack."
Yeah.
I don't think I have. I don't think I have either.
We don't like that term.
So,
To a
if
tree cutting technician, something.
tree tree maintenance engineer, if you're a lumberjack and you're listening to the podcast, please join us as one of our interviews, because we would just want to talk to a lumberjack for the
I unalive trees for a living. So,
Well, guys, we're a pretty good way in, and I think this has been a great journey. One of the things that I when thinking through why would we start by interviewing each other, I think what better frame to understand some of the conversations we're going to have in the future and our individual inputs, than to have these kinds of questions. And I Jeff, I love kind of seeing how your brain works and how your mind works. And um, I'm intimidated right now because I'm next in the hot seat. I'm up next, and that's a little scary. But from what I understand, preparation, sharpening the axe, will help me overcome the imposter syndrome when it's my time in the hot chair. I'll be up next for the interview, so same 20 questions. I'm excited about it. Kyle, thank you for tonight. Thank you for joining. Jeff, thank you for opening up and talking through some things, and sharing both, history and analogies, and just what a great conversation. Listeners, join us. And if you would, please go follow us on whatever your favorite platform that you get your podcasts on. Find us on social media on Facebook and LinkedIn, and keep coming back.
rock and roll.
Awesome.